On this Monday night, a deadly accident at New York's LaGuardia Airport. A collision between an Air Canada flight and a fire truck.
I messed up.
What we're learning about the two pilots who were killed, how passengers sprang into action, and the flight attendant who survived being ejected from the plane. The U.S. president decides not to bomb Iran for now.
They want to make a deal.
Why Iran's parliamentary speaker calls that fake news. Battling Bill 21, Canada's Supreme Court begins hearing a landmark challenge of Quebec's controversial secularism law. Plus, the show must go on. Canadian singing legend Celine Dion's triumphant return to the stage.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. LaGuardia Airport in New York City has now reopened after a fatal collision involving an Air Canada Jazz flight late on Sunday night. Both the captain and the first officer on that flight were killed. These are the images of the aftermath. The entire cockpit of the Air Canada flight from Montreal was shredded. The precise sequence of events isn't clear, but it appears to have been a head-on collision with an airport fire truck. 43 people on board were injured, including a flight attendant whose seat was ejected with her still strapped in it. Air Canada Flight 8646 had just touched down and was still at high speed when the fire truck, which had been cleared to cross the runway, appears to have driven right into its path. The fire truck was responding to an incident on another flight.
I want to extend my sympathies to the families of the two pilots. These were two young men at the start of their careers, so it's an absolute tragedy, that we're sitting here, with their loss.
Jackson Proskow is at LaGuardia Airport. Jackson, the investigation just beginning. Take us through what we know.
Well, Donna, even in these early stages of the investigation, the key pieces of evidence are right there on the runway here at LaGuardia. There's that Air Canada jet still sitting there with its crumpled nose. Behind it, you can't quite see it from this viewing angle, is the fire truck that was struck. And over the next few days, investigators from both the U.S. and Canada will be poring over both those pieces of evidence.
This is the moment it happened. The impact shattered the cockpit, shearing off the front of the plane.
I could see a plane propped up. It looked like it was almost like lifting off, but it was stationary. And then once we got a clear view of the actual wreckage, I knew that it was pretty serious.
Radio transmissions captured the air traffic controller's desperate attempt to stop the fire truck after realizing it was about to cross into the path of the landing aircraft.
Frontier 4195 to stop there, please. Stop, truck one, stop. Stop, truck one, stop. Stop, truck one, stop.
18 minutes later, in another transmission, the air traffic controller seemed to acknowledge making a mistake.
That wasn't good to watch. Yeah, I know I was here. I tried to reach out to my staff, and we were dealing with an emergency earlier. I messed up. No, man, you did the best you could.
The fire truck was responding to an issue with another aircraft when it crossed onto the runway. Both firefighters survived and are expected to recover from their injury.
We had a situation with the United Airlines aircraft that had experienced an aborted takeoff. This is the reason why the fire and rescue crew had been deployed. Of course, the Air Canada flight was arriving on runway 4 when the incident took place.
Air and ground traffic are supposed to be closely coordinated. Former air traffic controllers say this type of accident is highly unusual.
This is just really awful timing and really bad luck. For something like this to happen, for there to be contact on the runway between a vehicle and an airplane is just about unheard of.
The flight was operated by Jazz Aviation, Air Canada's largest regional partner. The airline says it's dispatching a specialized help team to New York.
We're fully supporting the relevant investigative authorities in their investigation to learn everything we can about these events.
That investigation will involve authorities from both the U.S. and Canada and will focus on everything from weather to air traffic controller staffing levels, all to pinpoint the cause of this deadly accident.
And to give you a sense of how slow and methodical this investigation is likely to be, we're being told that one of the two runways here at LaGuardia will likely remain closed until Friday because, of course, that Air Canada Express jet is still on the runway. And, Donna, investigators need time to pore over every piece of evidence that may still be in place.
Okay, Jackson Proskow at LaGuardia Airport, thank you. One of the Air Canada pilots who was killed has now been identified, and passengers on board that flight are describing how they had to scramble to find a way out of the plane and how a flight attendant managed to survive. Mike Armstrong is following that for us. Mike.
Well, Donna, there are some harrowing stories coming out of this crash, none more so than that of the woman who was the lead flight attendant. Solange Tremblay was seated at the front of the cabin behind the cockpit. Tremblay's daughter says her mother was thrown in her seat more than 100 meters from the wreckage.
Ils l'ont retrouvée, elle était encore attachée dans son banc.
Sarah Lepine says her mother was found still belted in. Her leg was broken in several places and she's undergone surgery. But Lepine says she's spoken to her mother and she seems to be doing okay. Now, according to others on the plane, the landing itself was bumpy, but within seconds of touching down, passengers felt braking more than usual.
And you heard the pilot try to brake, like he was trying to prevent the collision that occurred. And as you heard the brake, a couple seconds later, it was just a very loud boom.
Slam. Everybody was flying everywhere. I mean, like, the plane started veering off left and right. And there was, it was chaos.
Now, with much of the flight crew incapacitated, it was passengers themselves who decided to open the emergency exits. There was no ramp. Passengers slid down the wing to the ground. But many of the injuries were from the initial impact. A lot of passengers bumped their heads on the seats in front of them.
One of our friends was several rows back from us, and we walked past him on the way out because he was trying to find his glasses, and his nose was totally broken, bleeding on his face.
The identity of one of the pilots has been confirmed. Antoine Forrest was just 30 years old. The head of the FAA called this an absolute tragedy, saying both of the pilots were just at the start of their careers. Donna?
All right, Mike Armstrong in Montreal, thank you. The American Transportation Safety Board is leading the investigation. One of the big questions is why that fire truck was cleared to cross the runway as the Air Canada flight was landing. Touria Izri reports on what investigators will be looking for.
2 tragic deaths, 1 communication breakdown, and countless questions into how things went so horribly wrong.
I have been a pilot for 15 years, and I've never seen a passenger plane collide with a ground vehicle on a runway.
Investigators are trying to piece together what happened and why the pilots were seemingly unaware they were on a collision course until it was too late.
Did we end up with tunnel vision on the first incident and lose vigilance?
Flight 8646 departed Montreal at 10 p.m., headed for New York's LaGuardia Airport. At 11:47 p.m., it was approaching runway 4, the same time the fire truck was crossing below. The plane was traveling at roughly 167 kilometers an hour before it crashed into the emergency vehicle.
The big question I'm asking is, was this controller working the position of 2 jobs?
The U.S. Secretary of Transportation would not go into details about staffing levels Sunday night.
That's not for us to tell you. That'll be for the NTSB at the appropriate time.
Aviation experts say U.S. air traffic controllers are under immense strain, often working 6 days a week. Understaffing is made worse by government shutdowns, requiring them to work without pay. There was a record number of close calls in 2023, and last year an American Airlines plane and U.S. Army helicopter crashed near Washington's Reagan International Airport, killing 67 people on board.
The overworked controllers that we had last year when the Reagan incident occurred are still overworked this year.
Transport Canada has dispatched a team to LaGuardia.
We will be continuing to work together to get to the bottom, to find the answers that Canadians are going to be looking for.
The last time there was a deadly crash at LaGuardia Airport, it was 1992. And the last fatal accident involving an Air Canada plane was even earlier, in 1983 in Cincinnati, highlighting just how rare these incidents are. Donna?
Okay, Touria Izri in Montreal, thank you. A Colombian military plane with 125 people on board crashed shortly after takeoff today. The Hercules transport plane went down in southern Colombia near the border with Peru. It was carrying 114 passengers, most of them military, and 11 crew. According to Colombia's president, at least one person has died and 77 have been rescued. The status of the rest of those on board is unclear. The American president has backed down from his threat to destroy Iran's power plants unless the Strait of Hormuz was opened by tonight. Donald Trump claims someone in Iran's leadership has now reached out to negotiate, even though he claims to have killed all of Iran's leaders. Trump calls the talks very productive and says he's now postponed his planned attack for another 5 days.
And if it goes well, we're going to end up with settling this. Otherwise, we'll just keep bombing our little hearts out.
Iran quickly rejected any claim it is negotiating with the U.S. The financial markets rode this news like a roller coaster this morning. In under an hour, the S&P 500 took a $3 trillion swing, jumping close to 2%, then pulling back. Oil prices fell sharply. A barrel of Brent crude dropped over 12% at its lowest point today. When asked who will control the flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz if it eventually opens, Trump said this.
Maybe me. Maybe me. Me and the Ayatollah, whoever the Ayatollah is.
For now, the war is raging on. Redmond Shannon reports on the competing narratives.
Digging for survivors after what Iranian TV says was an Israeli airstrike on Tehran. This woman said her brother-in-law is somewhere inside the building.
We don't know if it's alive or not. Maybe dead or I don't know where.
Iranian government and independent estimates say more than 1,300 Iranian civilians have been killed in the war. There were fears that daily life there would be even more disrupted this week. On Saturday night, US President Donald Trump gave Iran 48 hours to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, or he would bomb power plants. Iran issued a counter threat to Gulf states. But then...
So they called. I didn't call. They called. They want to make a deal. They're not going to have nuclear weapons anymore. They're agreeing to that.
Because of that, Trump has postponed his deadline until Friday, when stock markets close. But he was coy about who the US is talking to.
A top person.
Even US allies appeared to know about it.
We, the UK, were aware that was happening.
Multiple news outlets later reported that the top person was Iran's parliament speaker, Mohammad Khalibaf. Within hours of Trump's claims of talks, Khalibaf called it fake news used to manipulate the financial and oil markets and to escape the quagmire in which the US and Israel are trapped. But Iran's foreign ministry did say intermediaries, reportedly Pakistan, have passed messages between the two sides. Still, Trump later doubled down on his version.
So we are now having really good discussions.
Lebanon is the other major front in this war. After its president said he feared a full-scale invasion from Israel, today Israel's finance minister said his country should annex all of southern Lebanon. Donna?
Redmond Shannon in London, thank you. Israeli settlers are pushing to control more of the occupied West Bank in violation of international law. Settlers staged simultaneous attacks on Palestinian towns and villages, setting homes and cars on fire. The Palestinian Red Crescent Society says at least 10 people were injured in one of the attacks on Sunday night in the occupied West Bank. The attacks happened as Palestinians were marking the end of Ramadan. The Israeli government is pressing ahead with new illegal settlements. The UN reports 25 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli settlers and soldiers this year. In London, the torching of 4 ambulances belonging to a Jewish charity is being investigated by police as an anti-Semitic hate crime. They were set on fire in Golders Green, a neighborhood with a large Jewish population. The British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, calls the attack deeply shocking. Federal immigration agents have been deployed to airports across the U.S. ICE agents appeared in airports in Chicago, Atlanta, Newark, and others. They're either patrolling terminals or stationed at security checkpoints. It's not clear yet whether that's helping ease extremely long wait times for passengers. partial U.S. government shutdown has left TSA agents unpaid for weeks as U.S. lawmakers clash over funding for the Department of Homeland Security. That has prompted some of the agents to either skip work or quit altogether. Foreign student fraud at Canada's post-secondary schools. Coming up, how the federal government has failed to investigate the problem. Canada's Auditor General released 3 reports today looking at shortcomings in the federal government. One of them focused on a high-profile commitment to reduce the number of permits for international students, including cracking down on fraudulent applications and expired permits. Jillian Piper explains how the government is falling short on those promises.
The department needs to act on the information it has.
The federal government is failing to fully investigate international student fraud, according to a new government watchdog report.
They have the powers and the tools. They just need to use them.
The Immigration Department identified 800 study permits where people faked or misrepresented their applications. But the report found the government took no action, even later granting 351 of them study extensions and 105 permanent residence.
We will act to improve these processes.
The immigration minister, who told a committee Monday that she had not actually read the report but was briefed on it, says improvements are coming.
We will be streamlining anyone that is flagged.
The department identified more than 153,000 students who were potentially non-compliant with study permit conditions, but the government only investigated about 4,000 of those cases, something the opposition says the immigration minister should fix.
The fact that she's coming out here and cannot ensure that all of these cases are being reviewed is crazy to me.
The Auditor General's office found both the government and the Border Services Agency lost track of 23,500 international students with expired study permits, and even gave them a list of names to help track down whether they are still in Canada.
Once you have your permit, there's no continuing obligation to keep reporting any changes of address. So it can be actually really quite easy to lose track of people.
The public safety minister would not say if those 23,500 people who have overstayed their visas are still in Canada or not.
Of course, those who have overstayed their overstayed their visas will be removed if they're not out of the country already.
The report found that new student visa approvals were far below the predicted levels in both 2024 and 2025, Donna, which the Carney government says is part of their plan to bring back control of the immigration system.
Okay, Jillian Piper in Ottawa, thank you. Freedom of religion versus a secular public service. Ahead, Quebec's Bill 21 heads to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court of Canada has begun one of its most consequential hearings. It is examining the validity of Quebec's secularism law, known as Bill 21. It prohibits people from wearing religious symbols and clothing while working in the public service. The Quebec government has twice invoked the notwithstanding clause preemptively to shield the law from being struck down by the courts. Now, the fight is at Canada's highest court, and David Aiken is watching. David.
Well, Donna, the Supreme Court has long held that the notwithstanding clause is pretty much immune from court challenge. That said, lawyers from several groups trying to overturn Bill 21 made some new arguments in here today.
Yes, a legislature can pass a law that substantially denies or infringes a charter right, but not where that is the purpose of the law. That is something that cannot be upheld.
Moreover, some argued Quebec has no constitutional authority to regulate morals and values.
The only purpose for banning religious symbols is to impose a particular vision of values on Quebec society. That is the essence of a criminal law.
And criminal law is the sole responsibility of the federal government. Some justices, though, appeared skeptical.
Don't you agree that the reality in Quebec is very different than the history in the rest of the country?
Quebec does have a unique history and a unique relationship with religion, but we have one federal constitution.
The case is not just about Quebec. The notwithstanding clause has been invoked 16 times in its 44-year history, but 9 times in just the last 2 years by Quebec, Ontario, Saskatchewan, and Alberta.
There must be limits on the use of the notwithstanding clause. If the clause can be used without meaningful constraint, courts could be rendered powerless, even when government sought to legalize grave injustices.
The court itself understands how high the stakes are. Normally, a hearing at the Supreme Court lasts just 1 day. A tricky case, 2 days. This case, 4 days. Up next, the Quebec government and other groups that support Bill 21. They will be warning the court away from any decision that restricts the right of a province to use the notwithstanding clause. Donna?
All right, David Aiken at the Supreme Court. Thanks, David. It looks like Canadian singer Celine Dion is about to make a comeback. Posters are popping up all over Paris bearing the titles of some of her best-known songs. A report yesterday in Quebec newspaper La Presse said the star is preparing to perform a series of concerts this fall at a 40,000-seat arena in the French capital. Dion was diagnosed with stiff person syndrome back in 2022. She's only performed live once since then at the opening ceremony of the Paris Olympics in 2024. No shows have been formally announced, but today the superstar posted a series of photos on Instagram of herself in Paris over the years saying, "I don't know how to tell you." Seems likely. That is Global National for this Monday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Bragg Creek, Alberta. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to globalnational@globalnews.ca. And thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.